Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thereafter, service was manifested from the legs of the personality of Godhead for the sake of perfecting the religious function. Situated on the legs are the Shudras, who satisfy the Lord by service. Service is the real constitutional occupation of all living entities. The living entities are meant to render service to the Lord, and they can attain religious perfection by this service attitude. One cannot attain religious perfection simply by speculating to attain theoretical knowledge. The Jnani division of spiritualists go on speculating only to distinguish the soul from matter, but they have no information of the activities of the soul after being liberated by knowledge. It is said that persons who only mentally speculate to know things as they are and who do not engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord are simply wasting their time. It is clearly said here that the principle of service was generated from the legs of the Lord for the sake of perfecting the religious process. But this transcendental service is different from the idea of service in the material world. In the material world, no one wants to be a servant. Everyone wants to become the master, because false mastership is the basic disease of the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul in the material world wants to lord it over others. Illusioned by the external energy of the Lord, he is forced to become a servant of the material world. That is the real position of the conditioned soul. The last snare of the illusory external energy is the conception of becoming one with the Lord. And due to this conception, the illusioned soul remains in the bondage of material energy, falsely thinking himself a liberated soul and as good as Narayana. It is actually better to be a Shudra than to be a Brahmana and not develop the service attitude, because that attitude alone satisfies the Lord. Every living being, even if he be a Brahmana by qualification, must take to the transcendental service of the Lord. Both Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam support that this service attitude is the perfection of the living entity. A Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra can perfect his occupational duties only by rendering service unto the Lord. A Brahmana is supposed to know this fact due to his perfection in Vedic wisdom. The other sections are supposed to follow the direction of the Brahmana Vaishnava, one who is a Brahmana by qualification and a Vaishnava by action. That will make the entire society perfect in regard to the order of its social construction. A disordered society cannot satisfy either the members of the society or the Lord. Even if one is not a perfect Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya or Shudra, but takes to the service of the Lord, not caring for the perfection of his social position, he becomes a perfect human being simply by developing the attitude of service to the Supreme Lord. Om Jnanitimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadhamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatayane Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. If there's any humility within my heart that exists, then with that humility ask for your blessings and prayers that I may say something today, even if it's just one sentence, that is pleasing to all the Vaishnavas and pleasing to the Guru Parampara. So, this is like a concluding verse of the 4 verses, including this one in total, of the 4 Varnas in relation to the universal form of the Lord. So what was described to Vidur first was that the Brahman is manifested from the mouth of the universal form. And why the mouth? Sometimes it's said the mouth, or we may hear the head of the Lord. Because this represents knowledge. And the Brahmanas are there to spread the knowledge throughout society and to all the other Varnas in how they can understand their constitutional position, which is the spirit self, and how they can connect back with Krishna. Next, what was described is that the Kshatriyas were manifested from the arms of the universal form. And the reason being the arms as a form of protection. The Kshatriyas are meant to protect society from miscreants, just the way Parikshit Maharaj did. Mine went blank. So if we think about it, when we think about protection, if you wanted to go into a defense mode, instantly use your arms for protection. So in the same way, this tendency is there because the Kshatriyas are manifested from the arms of the universal form of the Lord. Next are the Vaishyas, which we heard about yesterday, and they are manifested from the waist of the Lord. So the middle point, we can say, between the legs and then the upper body. And finally today, we read that the legs of the personality of Godhead have manifested the Shudras. And the Lord has done this for the sake of perfecting the religious function. So I'll just read the translation again of today's verse. Thereafter, service was manifested from the legs of the personality of Godhead for the sake of perfecting the religious function. Situated on the legs are the Shudras who satisfy the Lord by service. So we've heard many times throughout many scriptures, Krishna speaking himself in the Bhagavad Gita about the Varnashram system. And specifically what we're looking at here is Varnas, occupational duty. In today's day and age, everything is completely switched around, has become completely perverted. Everything is upside down. So during the Vedic times, or the way the system was meant to function, is that there's Brahmanas who would lead society, the Kshatriyas would then protect, the Vaishyas would grow the economy, focus on farming, so there's food for every person within society, no one goes hungry, and the Shudras would then serve each of those Varnas above as laborers. You could say in modern days like manpower. Manpower is needed for these 3 other Varnas. But in today's society, so also the Shudras would be maintained because of their service to all the other Varnas. They would be maintained. So they wouldn't necessarily earn money themselves, so they can then spend it themselves. Just the way the society is now, everyone in society earns their own money, and they are encouraged to do as they please with that own money. the Vaishyas obviously would help grow the economy, agriculture, vegetation. They would be the ones getting that wealth, as well as Kshatriyas would know how to get the wealth, but also because they were very resourceful. And the Brahmanas, as I said before, the Kshatriyas, they would collect tax from the other two Varnas. So the Vaishyas and the Shudras. But the Brahmanas, again, they would be maintained. They wouldn't need to have tax collected from them. But in today's society, everything's switched around. We can see that Shudras actually are more prevalent in society. They're the ones earning most money. If we think about Shudras, we can think of one side, yes, as laborers, but also entertainers in society. So like musicians, artists, and they're the ones in today's society earning millions and millions of pounds. And what do they do with that money? They spend it on unnecessary things. Drugs, sex, jewelry, all for what? Just going in this spiral again and again. Fancy cars, etc. And that's why a Shudra is not given so much wealth in that sense, because they don't have the intelligence to know what to do with the wealth. So that's why ultimately the Brahmanas would be giving that knowledge and guidance to all the other Varnas in how to function in society. But what it's said over here, as Prabhupada explains in the purport, is that the Shudras, because they serve others, they have this attitude of service. And ultimately what Krishna wants, or what Krishna desires, or the relationship we can have with Krishna is that of service. Now, sometimes when we come onto the path of bhakti, when we come into spirituality, we sometimes may have an immature mindset where we think nothing else matters except for my spiritual practices, spirituality, and everything material is no longer valid. But that would be the case if we all became pure devotees in a second. But unfortunately, that is not the case. And that's why this is a process. And in this process, as the Supreme Lord has manifested through the universal form, a Varnashram system. So how can we see how... So there's two aspects. The Sanatan Dharma, our true spiritual identity, and Svadharma, our occupational duty, accordance to our psychophysical nature, this body that we are in currently. So how can we see the importance of then Svadharma? Well, we can see of three ways. Firstly, Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita. Secondly, it's within the Srimad Bhagavatam, which we're reading currently. And if we think about how the Srimad Bhagavatam manifested this particular version we have, Srila Vyasadeva was in frustration. He felt something was missing within his heart. And so Narad Muni expressed to him that, yes, you've written hundreds and thousands of verses, all these Vedas, all these scripts for society, but what you should do is write about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that's how your heart will be fulfilled. In which he did do so by writing the Srimad Bhagavatam. But within the Srimad Bhagavatam, we can see if it's all in relation to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then so too is the Varnashram system. It's like, for example, in order for the spirit soul to function in the material world, we need the material body in order to interact with everything material. For example, if someone works in a toxic condition, they work in, like certain plants where they deal with, a lot of dangerous gases, what they would put on is a hazmat suit. So in order to function within that area, they will wear a particular suit in order to function. So in the same way, the spirit soul, in order to function in the material world, we have this particular suit, this particular body, this particular vehicle in order to function. But what comes with these vehicles are, again, certain psychophysical natures or settings, you could say. And finally, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada we may famously know, he says that what I have done is 50%. Everything within us, ISKCON we see, Prabhupada says, is 50% of what he wanted to achieve. And the other 50% is to establish Varnashram Dharma. So we can see the significance that we should not immaturely give up everything and bypass spiritually. So, why is it important then? It's important because the great analogy we can use is a car. So there's not only a car, but any four-wheeled vehicle. So there's a car, there's a van, there's a pickup truck, there's a lorry, and then we could relate these to the different varnas, right? So for example, a lorry can take a huge load of items. But if you put that in a car, what's going to happen to the car? It probably won't move, or if it does, it'll be dragging, right? So that's why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that we should do our duty even if done imperfectly, but not imitate another person's duty, even if supposedly done perfectly. So just the way the lorry can take a big load, even if you somehow perfectly put everything within the car neatly, so there's no gap at all between the boxes or whatever the load is, and you get a trailer for the car and then you put the rest of the items on, still the car will go slow, this car will drag, right? So you will not be able to get to your destination quick enough. So in the same way, if we spiritually bypass and ignore the Varnashram system immaturely, then it can hinder our spiritual practice. It may not take us from point A to our destination quicker than what we ultimately want, right? So this is to say we should not obviously neglect the Varnashram system and where we stand. In today's day and age, in Kali Yuga, everything is very mixed. As Prabhupada has famously said, everyone in Kali Yuga is ultimately a Shudra, right? Because we have particular tendencies, and especially from the effects of Kali Yuga. But once we gain this knowledge and start to see, okay, how are the settings of this psychophysical nature I have, then we can start to see what is more prominent than the other. Someone might have more Kshatriya qualities, more Brahminical qualities, more Vaishya qualities, and someone else might have more Shudra qualities. So this is important, of course, but it's not to say that it's on an equal level in one sense with Sanatana Dharma, with our real position. Because if we neglect that, then ultimately there's no value of the Varnashram Dharma. As it's said on the last sentence of this verse, situated on the legs are the Shudras who satisfy the Lord by their service. So it's not just talking about the Varnas and a category of their own, separate from the Lord, but it's how they are in relation to the Lord and also the function of this material world, which ultimately comes from Krishna himself. And we do not operate, we meaning the spirit self, our true self, we do not operate on lifetime. It's not that we're here in this lifetime and then that medium between our next lifetime nothing happens, or we no longer exist and we just come in and out of existence. We operate on existence. We are forever existing. As Krishna explained to Arjuna, as well as all of us in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, never was there a time where I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings present. And he's talking, and nor shall we cease to exist. And he's not only talking to Arjuna and all those present on the battlefield, but to every single living entity. And we know the famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 20, Najayate namriyate vakadachit. So for the soul there's neither birth nor death. The soul has not come into being and will not come into being, and shall never exist. He's eternal. So it's important that we have this broader vision. Though we have particular settings, though we have particular natures of this psychophysical body, the gross body and subtle body, it's important to always see from the highest plane of our true existence, which is the spirit soul, which is a spiritual life. And we have a deep and profound relationship with Krishna. It's always important to see that state, because then we may become too entangled with what varna I am, what qualities I have, that we miss the bigger picture. That ultimately, we're just using this vehicle for what it can do in order to help us grow closer to Krishna. So that's very important. And Prabhupada expresses this in the second part. He says, it's clearly said here that the principal service was generated from the legs of the Lord for the sake of perfecting the religious process. But this transcendental service is different from the idea of service in the material world. So like I said before, what value is there if we're so focused on our particular occupational duty and what it constitutes? Because it relates to just then service in the material world or action in the material world. And again, that's temporary, right? If we were to try, though we can't, but just the way the material mind can put into perspective, if we were to put eternity on a timeline, which you can't because it's never ending, if we were to say it's this big, for example, this particular lifetime is so small we cannot even, it's practically invisible on just this timeline of eternity. So the actions we do, yes, they make a difference. The service we do, yes, they make a difference. But in relation to what or whom? If they're in relation to just satisfying the satisfying the self, then it becomes of no value. Why? Because we'll remain in the material world. And we'll do that again and again and again and again and again for so many lifetimes. Whereas when we relate it to the Supreme Lord, then it becomes of value. So it's like how Dhruva Maharaj mentions that when he sees Narayan, he realizes, in the forest, he realizes that all along, when I got frustrated that I could not sit on the lap of my father, I was ultimately just chasing broken glass. But now that I have seen the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I can see he is like a diamond. So they may seem similar, right? If you look at it very closely, you put it right to your eyes, they may seem similar, they reflect light. But broken glass doesn't have any value. If you try selling broken glass to anyone, they'll refuse straight away. But the diamond has value. So our actions and Shishi Radha Gokulananda ki jai, Shishi Sita Ram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai, Shishi Gauranitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So how we relate the psychophysical nature, the varna we have, the ashram we're in, to Krishna is what's valuable. Is the diamond rather than the broken glass. So it's amazing what Prabhupada says here is that it's actually better to be a Shudra than a Brahmana and not develop the service attitude, because that attitude alone satisfies the Lord. To satisfy the Lord, we want to be servants. But see, a Shudra, for example, is a servant, is a direct servant to one person or many people. But we don't want to be a direct servant, because what pleases Krishna is not to be a servant of Krishna, but das, anudas, 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 to be the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna. Why? Because the false ego is so dense. It's so dense that when we see, the Varnashram systems in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada talks about it, it's so important. We may become so latched onto that, and the ego may become so latched onto that it's so dense that we forget our true position, our eternal position. So that's why it's so important it's important, of course, like I mentioned, to understand our Varna, to help us function better in the world in relation to Krishna. But it's even more important to never lose sight of our real purpose, our real existence, our relationship with Krishna. So Prabhupada further goes on to say, a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra can perfect his occupational duties only by rendering service unto the Lord. Right? In everything we do, we always want to perfect it or bring it close to perfection in some way or other. Right? Even within our Krishna consciousness, obviously, we want to become perfect, and that perfection is becoming a pure devotee. But like I mentioned, and like Prabhupada emphasizes here, that one's occupational duty can only become perfect when they render transcendental service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it says, towards the end, even if one is not a perfect Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, but takes to the service of the Lord, not caring for the perfection of his social position. So they've taken into account their social position, they carry it out, but they may not do it perfectly. But they can still become a perfect human being simply by developing the attitude of service to the Supreme Lord. So that's basically a culmination of of these 4 verses to this one point. That yes, the Varna system is important. It helps us function within the world. If we try to do another Varna, it's going to drag us back, and it's going to be a difficult journey connecting with Krishna. But ultimately, what we need to focus on is our true spiritual nature. And even if we aren't perfect in our occupational duty, but we render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord and become that servant of the servant of the servant. Not just by action, with intention, by thought, by words. Our whole being, we become the servant of the servant of the servant. Then we become a perfect human being. And so, today marks also Srila Prabhupada accepting sannyas, which is, sannyas is obviously part of the ashram system, varnashram system, since we're talking about it today. And also, as mentioned earlier in today morning, when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also took sannyas, and he was then on the search of his brother, Vishvarup, right? Yes. So, I don't know if you all saw the Prabhupada play last year, but it's very fresh in my mind of the incident which led for Prabhupada to leave the Grahastha ashram to then pursue the sannyasa ashram and obviously come to the West and give us this wonderful mercy of a movement, ISKCON. So obviously Prabhupada was writing, and all his writing wasn't culminated in a physical book. But back then, in Kolkata, they used to have a bartering system. Rather than paying someone with cash, or in today's age, digital money, they used to have a bartering system. So dependent on the weight of what you can give, someone will give a weight of what they can give. So someone was coming around and offering tea biscuits. Prabhupada was not home at this time, but his wife was, and she really enjoyed tea and tea biscuits with her friends. So she was wondering, what can I give that's of a good weight for a good amount of tea biscuits? And she gave Prabhupada's writings of his Srimad Bhagavatam. Prabhupada came home. He was obviously very upset. His life's work, imagine writing so many pages, a stack of pages. It's not only mentally taxing, but it's physically taxing, writing. Just imagine writing for so long, it can hurt your arm. That was that was all given away. Then Prabhupada, decided, this is the time to fully give myself in pursuance of my spiritual master's instruction. So Prabhupada took sannyas, and, Prabhupada was amazing because he taught us that sannyas is not just external. It's not just about the clothes. He says that even a grihastha, I'm not sure where he says this, if anyone knows where the reference is, but that even a grihastha can be more than a sannyas, because they're not only doing so many duties, looking after the family, going out to work, all that time is given there, but at the same time they're practicing, they're doing their sadhana and rendering transcendental service unto the Lord. So Prabhupada taught us that all these principles are an internal journey, and how we can always see the bigger picture, how we can always relate what varna we have, what ashram we're in relation to Krishna all the time. And that's what makes one Krishna conscious. So how can we relate or utilize everything I have in the service of Krishna, rather than being so caught up in these particular settings that I have within this body, or the ashram I am in, the shelter I am taking. So I'll just leave you all on this note. We don't have much time left. We can possibly take questions if there are any. But I'll just leave you on this note. That what value is there of a Shudra being maintained and carrying out service when they aren't serving the Supreme Lord and only wanting His shelter for maintenance? What value is there of a Vaishya to try and grow the economy and feed everyone by farming when they aren't feeding their true self and growing deeper in love with Krishna? What value is there of a Kshatriya to protect society, protect the people, when they aren't protecting their own Bhakti Lata Bij? And what value is there of a Brahmana to do all these rituals and focus on small details like what's clean, what's not clean, what's suchi, what's smuchi, when they aren't taking the ritual of prioritizing the holy name of the Lord and removing the dirt from their heart and cleansing the heart through the holy name. And so, one verse which sticks out to me always is when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Hare Nam, Hare Nam, Hare Nam, Eva Kevalam, Kalo Nasteva, 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 Gati Ranyata. That the holy name is the only way. He emphasized the only way in this day and age how we can go beyond all of these externals and go deep within the self in order to connect with Krishna. So I thank you very much. If there are any questions or comments or corrections, then please, I'd deeply appreciate it.
Hare Krishna, Babu. Thank you so much for the thoughtful class. I was just thinking, you mentioned how Varnashram nowadays is kind of topsy-turvy. The Shudras are on top, and but if we look at it, it's kind of very well established out there. You can't really do much to change it. So I've kind of over the years seen like two trends of thoughts between devotees. One is like, it is what it is. Somehow we fit in there because we all have to earn money, survive. But we try to practice whatever Krishna consciousness we can, and on a personal level try and make the best of the situation. And another thing I've seen is where, okay, well that's not right, but let's try and establish something between us. So we have kind of like a varnashram going in the temple, there's different levels of brahmanas and vaishyas, and then we have our cows, and we kind of do our thing there. So I was just wondering, are we meant to like try and change the world out there because we are kind of pioneers in society and establish something more Varnashram friendly, and if so, how do you do it? Or do we just accept it is what it is, we can't change that, let's try and do our little thing here or whatever, something like that? I don't know what your thoughts were.
You know, a happy life is a balanced life. Krishna says this in the Bhagavad Gita, that one needs to be balanced in their sleep, eating, recreation. So there's these two thoughts. If we just all went one way, one end of the spectrum, for example, trying to establish our own thing, we neglect the outside world. If we try to just change the world and neglect the current devotees, then it harms the devotees. So the greatest thing is balance. So yes, we can establish our own thing, but at the same time, we can spread this knowledge around the world, right? Not everyone, again, has the particular utility to help or create this particular varnashram. But what we can do is help those who are trying to do so, right? So just the way the Shudras help other Varnas in society, we all can help those who are doing particular things. Like, for example, I know Premaraj mentioned yesterday he works at the Avanti school. That's a wonderful service and project for the ISKCON movement. So if we can't physically do something, we can just try help wherever we can, because ultimately everything is for the future, right? In the sense that where you are sitting right today is all come from Prabhupada and all his disciples that will, giving their blood, sweat and tears for us to be here, right now. So in the same way, I know the way the world is, it's so established, it's so strong that I can't make change, or if we all tried to implement Varnashram system in our outside world, it's not going to happen in the next 50 years. But we can all take small steps and have this balanced view that, okay, there are devotees who are trying to implement it within the temples or the communities, and there are other devotees who are preaching outside. And so we should have a balanced view and respect both of the sides and work to help both of the sides. Because ultimately, if we constantly see, okay, there's these two sides, what are we going to do? The way the world makes us think, we're going to ultimately choose one. But we shouldn't, because both are good, right? So it's good to have a balanced view.
Hare Krishna, Guru. Thank you for a nice class. You spoke a lot about service and serving society, serving Krishna. So can you explain to us the difference between serving society, or so-called material service, and devotional or transcendental service? Thank you.
So serving material society starts with and ends with sense gratification, right? Because even, for example, and Prabhupada explains this a lot, there's this extended sense gratification, meaning we want to serve those connected to us. Or I want to serve society because I want to look good. Or I want awards and accolades. But when we do transcendental service, we have the quality of humility, and we want to serve everyone in relation to their true self, the spirit soul, and their connection, and to help reignite their connection with Krishna. But material service, again, it becomes it just manifests from and into sense gratification. And ultimately you become frustrated. But we can see the result of transcendental service. One is always in bliss, one is always in joy, because they're always connected to Krishna and they're helping others connect to Krishna. Hope that is good. Yes, probably.
I think Krishna answers this question here in chapter 18. He says, in all activities, just depend on me. And work always under my protection in such devotional service. And be in such devotional service, be conscious of me. If you become conscious of me, you will pass over all obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not, you act through false ego, not hearing me, you'll be lost. If you do not act according to my direction, and you do not fight, when you are then you will be forcefully directed by your nature. You will have to be engaged in warfare. Under illusion, you are now declining to act according to my direction, but compelled by your work, born of your own nature, you will act all the same. So then he says, the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart and directing the wanderings of all the living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. So that's 1858 to 1861, which I think he says, just do what you can do. Don't think about your future. That's not ours to be seen. So carry on. And there was a nice thing that Kanakadamba Maharaj, he had a whole class, and it just said, just carry on. Just carry on. He answered all their questions, and he said it so many times to all the questions, just carry on. And that's it.
Thank you, Prabhu. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.